Hey, what's up? This is Blake from the Tone Mob Podcast, and I'm coming at you with another video version of the show. Audio podcast listeners got this one a few weeks ago because that's been my main thing for years, but for you people who love the videos, I'm trying to get those out as quickly as I can. I've got a huge backlog, and I'm slowly working through them as I have time, and here is one of those episodes. Today, I am talking with Derek and Dan from Rev Amps. We got the whole story, we got the trials and tribulations, we got the fun, we got the laughs, we got the whole thing. It's really a great episode. I hope you enjoy this. Watch the whole thing. Let me know what you think down in the comments section below. Or if you're more of an audio podcast person the way I am, you can go over to Spotify, Apple, or any other audio platform, and there are 370-something episodes there for you, and counting. I add more every single week. I always keep up on that one, and if that's more your thing, please go check it out wherever you get your audio podcasts. But if you're more of a video person, here is the video version of my conversation with Derek and Dan. Let's go. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Tone Mob Podcast, the show about guitar stuff, occasionally, sometimes. I'm your host, Blake Weiland. With me today, I have Derek and Dan from Rev Amps. What is happening, folks? How you doing?
Doing great.
Doing well, man.
Yeah.
Good
It's
to
nice.
see you.
It's like relatively warm for Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
Can't complain.
So it's like 40 degrees Fahrenheit is, relatively warm?
Yeah. Started snowing lightly this afternoon, so we're good. Everything's normal here.
Wandered out of our igloos to get here.
Yeah.
Stopped ice fishing for a moment and decided to come in. Yeah.
Hopped on my snow machine and away,
Yeah. Got on the moose and trotted on over.
Yeah. Hammered down some poutine and now we're here. That's right.
Man. Yeah. It's another day in the office in Canada.
I like it. I think I need to become Canadian. I like the sound of that quite a lot. Well, I'm really excited to have you guys here. I've wanted to talk to you for quite a while. And Derek, we met at Gearfest, and I've told a few people this. You were one of the ones I was like, I'm going to run around and say hi to everybody. And we just talked for like an hour because it was like we just automatically had that little click that whatever happens like once in a while. So. That was cool.
Yeah, man. It was awesome. It's rare that I've found people that are involved with, especially like with gear companies. Talking to you about Stringjoy, like it's rare that I find people that I feel like think very similarly to me and view the market very similarly to the way that I do. So yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, it was a really good time. But I thought it would be prudent to get you guys both on the podcast and sit down and talk about the history of Rev, because I think almost anyone who pays any attention to guitar media has seen that logo somewhere in somebody's video or in some capacity, because you guys do a really good job with getting out there in front of people. But I don't think as many people know the story of the company. So I thought getting you all on to tell that tale would probably be a pretty fun experience.
Yeah. That all starts with Dan. It would be best for you to tell me, because I am the guy who tries to get that logo in front of people. That's my primary job. He's the one who makes everything that sounds and feels amazing. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, man, I feel like I've told this story far too often. Everybody should know it by now.
The year was 1974.
Yeah, it was 74. I was, right
twinkling my pop's eye.
Yeah, exactly. 74, eh? Wow, okay. I don't think I look that old, do I? Thanks. I just, it was interesting because I actually started the concept of, getting into tube amplifiers at all, just because of a back injury and being bored. It was interesting. I was an industrial mechanic prior to this and doing robotics and stuff like that. And I hurt my back really bad and had to remain off work for, it was a number of years. It was like 4 to 5 years or something like that. And so being the type of guy I am, I couldn't just sit around and just do nothing. And so just started tinkering with gear. I was a musician as well, a guitar player in bands and whatnot. And so, I mean, all that stuff had to come to a screaming halt. And so, yeah, just out of pure boredom, I just started tweaking gear and modifying things. And one thing led to another, and I started designing an amplifier just for myself. And, it was nothing crazy. I was just tinkering with tones and just for myself, right? It was nothing that I planned to get into business with. And over the course of doing that and having others play it, it was kind of people putting that in my ear, essentially, like, "Oh, Dan, this is really good. You should consider getting into business and selling it. People would probably buy this." And I was like, "Oh yeah, okay." Just kind of humored them for a little bit, like, yeah, it's a cool idea or whatever. But and then just after a little while, I gave it some thought and thought, okay, well maybe I'll give it a try and sell a few or whatever. Nothing major, just a couple guys in Winnipeg or whatever might buy it. Started working on essentially the first generator. And I kind of wanted to go with something that was more of a flagship. So I started working on the 4-channel Beast and had musicians around Winnipeg kind of putting their 2 cents in on tones and stuff like that, which was pretty cool because I had, other ears other than my own, kind of giving me, confirmation that I was headed in the right direction or not.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, one thing led to another, and I was looking for a guy to screen print text onto the front plates, and I managed to run into Derek, and he was the guy to do that for me. And yeah, the rest is sort of history. One thing led to another, and
yeah,
we started Rev.
Yeah, like I got a call in 2013, and it was my general manager, and he's like, I got this email from this dude who used to work for me when I was at another shop, and he's got a buddy who's building guitar amps and needs somebody to, print on the chassis or something. He's like, I don't really know. He's like, it's really not worth our time to do. He's like, I know you like guitar stuff, so I figured I better tell you about it. I'm like, oh, cool. I'm like, well, yeah, just leave it on my desk, and when I get in, I'll take a look at it. So there was like an email print off just sitting on my desk with Dan's information. And so I think I called you, and I was like, hey, I'm like, so it sounds like you got an amp. And I'm like, I'd love to try the amp. And, the printing, yeah, I'm pretty sure I can do that, because where we're located, there's a couple of screen print companies here, but there's not a lot that can print onto like powder coated metal. Mm-hmm. It tends to be a bit of a specialty. And I had, that's when I started in screen printing, that's what I actually started doing, was a lot of metalwork parts. So I was like, I can do it. And I remember the first time you showed up at my shop, you showed up, and I had told him to bring the amp with him, and he showed up with the plates. And I'm like looking, and I'm like, I don't see an amp, but
yeah, we're the tubes.
Yeah. And he's like, I didn't bring the amp. He's like, I just brought the plates to see if you could do it. I'm like, I can do that. I'm like, sure. I'm like, bring the amp down. And I honestly thought that it was going to be, I didn't think it was going to be great, because I had a couple of other guys locally that were building pedals that asked me to screen them. And, I screen printed a couple of pedals, and, I tried them, and they were like, did you want one? And I'm like, I'm good. Like, thanks, but I don't need a fuzz pedal. I don't like them. I can't play them. So let alone a bad one. So I was kind of expecting, like, it can't be that great. I mean, I played Mesa Boogie and Fender stuff primarily at the time, and I'm like, nothing's going to beat my dual rack, And you came down it must have been like a couple weeks later, you came back with the actual, because you needed to get new parts or something. Mm-hmm. I remember you had changed something, and you came back with them, and I beat it. I had no intention of being involved in an amp company either. I was quite happy in the printing industry. And but I set the 120 down on top of my dual rectifier, and I A-B'd the rectifier against the 120. And I remember I didn't play for very long. It was just a couple of minutes. I set my guitar down, and I asked you where you built it and how you did it. Mm-hmm. And you said that you laughed at me, and you said, built it in my basement over the last 2 years. Yeah. And I said, and then you asked, and how did I do what? And I said, well, you fixed everything that's wrong with the rectifier. I said, it doesn't sound like the rectifier. I'm like, but everything I don't like about the rectifier, this fixes. And I think I remember this correctly, but I said, you can build me one And you laughed and said, I didn't tell you how much it was.
Yeah.
And I said, that's fine. I didn't tell you how much the printing was either. And then you told me it was $2,500. And I was like, well, the printing won't be $2,500, so I'm going to owe you some money, but you go ahead and build me one.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember like shortly after that, I talked to my wife and I was like, you'll never believe what came here. Because I mean, Winnipeg is there's a lot of fabulous musicians from here.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess it should be known for gear. I mean, Peter's Amplification is here and he builds great stuff. I mean, Garnet is from here. So there is a bit of pedigree of cool gear from here, like McConnell guitars and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it's not like, I still would have never expected that, right? Like I expect that from, great amps come from the USA or from Germany. That's where, or the UK. I shouldn't not mention the UK.
I was going to say there is the Marshalls, but yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I told my wife, I'm like, you'll never guess what like walked into the house today. And I'm like, she's like, what? I said, probably the best guitar amp I've ever played. And she's like, what? From where? And I'm like, this dude is building them in his basement in the North End in Winnipeg. And she's like, oh. She's like, you didn't buy one, did you? I'm like, yep. I'm like, sure did. And she's like, okay. And then it was like, back then it took you, because you still had a day job, because you were back working then. And like, it was like a month or so it was about a month for everyone that you were building.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember like messaging you over that month and was just like, I was giving you suggestions for things that like, hey, it'd be cool because back then the logo was white. Like the prototype, the logo was glowing white. And I remember messaging you being like, hey, it'd be cool. Like, what if you could do like instead of doing the just laser etched acrylic, I'm like, what if you did like a blue acrylic panel for one, or did like a red panel, and like you could have it that you could choose like what the color was. And you're like, I've already fixed that and changed it to something else. And I'm like, okay. And then you delivered my amp.
Yeah, right.
And I got it. And like when you brought it over, as I'm changing channels, the colors, like the logo changes color. I'm like, this is way better than what I was suggesting that you should do. I'm like, that's awesome. So, so that was kind of the start of it. And then I called a buddy of mine that's one of my best friends here, who's a guitar player, and said, man, you got to come try this amp that I got. And he came down and tried it. And he had heard about you from one of his guitar players. And that just kind of sparked in me that I had always wanted to have something like from my print company. I'd always wanted to have something where I was in control of the marketing to direct to the consumer. And it was something that I helped manufacture to sell direct to consumer. Because most of what we do in screen printing is we're printing on T-shirts that somebody else is selling, or we're printing decals or something that is going on somebody else's product. And we have no control if that customer decides to sell their business and then all of a sudden they're dealing with another print company. Like, we have no control over the product. And I was like, man, I would love something where I had some control over my customer from the print company. So I reached out to you about partnering up. And I do remember that when I asked you, have you ever thought about having a partner, you saying, yeah, do you know anyone? And I was like, well, I was thinking me, but yeah. And I said, I'm like, yeah, me. And you're like, oh, okay, yeah, well, let me think about that. And I think we had like 1 or 2 lunches.
Yeah.
And then we were off to the races.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the start of 2014. Mm-hmm. And then many years and many dollars later.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Here we are.
We got to the point where, hey, now we can do this as a job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As the only job.
That's one of the things we connected on, right? We were talking about, it's like the years that you put in that, to become an overnight success is about the most absurd thing I've ever heard. Like, I bring this up a lot, but you'll hear on the Grammys or some other award show, they're like, an award for best new artist goes to.
Yeah.
And there are times where I'm like, I know that person's been at it for over 10 years and they're the best new artist. It's that way sometimes in this industry too, where it's like you just go at it and go at it and go at it and go at it. And all of a sudden, wow, how are you successful? It's like, wow. Lots of late nights, lots of hair loss, lots of stress, and I think it shows a lot of tenacity to get to where anybody even knows your name at all in this business.
I just remember being so naive. when we started. And you're 100% right in your point. Like I had that this year that I won't out who it was, but I was there's a big artist that was in town that was playing the arena here, and I was hanging out with their guitar tech, and he's a great dude, but he was just like, man, he's like, you guys have really kind of come out of nowhere, and like you're making a big push, and I'm like, it's been 10 years almost.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, the come out of nowhere is 10 years.
Yeah.
And it's just that now we're finally at the point where the work that we've done over the last 10 years, that logo is finally getting in front of some of the faces that I would have thought we would have been in front of at our first NAMM show, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I remember going to NAMM in 2015 and you and I talking before it. And the problem at NAMM 2015 for us going into it was us talking about how are we going to handle the volume of orders that we had, because you had just quit your job and were finally, full time at Rev. I think you quit in like November of 14, maybe.
Yeah, that's right.
And I was like, you know what? I'm like, I'll say it now because it's, it sounds a little bit arrogant, but I was like, I know how big Mesa Boogie is. I know that we've got a product that it's different than Mesa Boogie, but I know that the problem that it solves, I know there's a lot of Mesa players that are going to love this. And I think that, there's zero chance that we're not leaving NAMM with probably at least 100 amps on order. I mean, that's not a lot, They were $2,600 at the time or something. I'm like, that's no big deal. We did the show, and I had been to NAMM a couple of times just as a tourist and saw, I knew how big it was. I knew what the pitfalls were. We went with our own soundproof room to make sure that okay, I know how to make this show a success for us. And we left there. We sold one amp to an artist, like a kid that we signed to an artist deal for a significant discount. And that's all we did. And we went on vacation right after NAMM. I left from California to go on vacation. And I remember sitting in the condo that my wife and I were staying at, and just sitting there. And my wife's like, what do you think? And I'm like, I think the road ahead in the next few years is going to be a lot more difficult than what I had thought. And I'm like, there's a lot more work than what I had ever anticipated. And it was probably the hardest lesson to learn. And I think that's why a lot of companies do fold so fast, is because people don't realize that even now at Dan's more than 10 years in. Dan's got a couple years on me in this. And I mean, my days normally start on, I'll be honest, it's between 9 and 10 a.m. most days for me, but they finish at 3 o'clock in the morning. Almost every day. And most people don't understand that, and don't understand that it doesn't matter what level of success you get to, or how big the company looks like it is. There's that much work always. And and it's kind of just this constant struggle to remain growing. I'm not somebody that chases after insane perpetual growth, just growth period, because we know that there's going to be a lot of people that listen to this podcast that actually probably have not ever heard of us or know anything about us, because we still probably haven't reached probably 80% of the addressable market. So that job feels like it's kind of never done.
Absolutely.
It really isn't. I mean, that's the thing, is there are so many, it's not entirely different from trying to be an artist, right? It's one of those things where when it works, it's one of the coolest jobs ever. And so therefore, there are a lot of people attempting to either start their own companies, or maybe they're working at other companies that are also, as friendly as this industry is, you're still competing. There's only so much attention. There's only so many people playing. It's very limited, and it's grown a lot in the last few years, but it's still a finite resource. And so when you have all these people trying to compete for the same quote unquote position in the industry or in a company, it makes it challenging, and it makes the cream rise to the top, so to speak, because having a great product it's necessary. It's it's the base level. There's lots of great products.
Oh yes.
So what do you do to go above and beyond that is what's going to set you apart. You know, like the products have to be good. That like goes without saying for the most part.
Oh yeah.
I was doing this talk at NAMM this year for Worship Musician Magazine, and we were talking about like modelers versus I think it was kind of modelers versus amps, but the theme was like going direct and being able to use like silent stage stuff. And somebody asked the question, like the moderator asked the question of like, so what is best or what is better? And they were talking about like, you know, Fractal versus Kemper versus Line 6, like versus, you know, the D20 or the D25. And I made a point to say this, and it ties into what you just said, and that is that like there is no best. Mm-hmm. Everyone builds great stuff. That's the problem now, is that
right.
everyone builds great stuff. So we are all fighting for you know, for whatever dollars or for whatever attention even that we can get from consumers, because there is actually, you know, essentially a limited number of consumers. And really, as companies grow, for the most part, what's happening is you're stealing market share from somebody else is what you're doing. Because the base of guitar players, at least I would say up until the pandemic for sure, we could comfortably say that the overall global base of guitar players was shrinking, not growing.
Mm-hmm. Or at least stagnant. Yeah.
Yeah. And the pandemic may have changed that, because there are a lot of there are a lot of people who bought guitars to start learning how to play during the pandemic. So I think we'll be able to see whether or not they continue with that over the next few years. We'll start to see whether or not that kind of takes root with anybody or not. But, you know, I get so annoyed when I hear people like, you know, companies because they built some sort of pedal that somebody doesn't like. Well, I'm like, just because you don't like it doesn't mean that it's not cool. I legit, make no bones about it, I don't like fuzz pedals. I don't know how to play them. It's just, I never gel with like the best of the best. Like Joey Landreth will come by and show me the latest fuzz that he loves, and I'll play it and I'll be like, sounds like a fuzz pedal to me. Like it's just not my deal. He makes it sound amazing. And it doesn't mean that those fuzz pedals suck. It just means that it's not for me. And I think that's a thing that people get caught up in, is they think that there are people who are out there building and releasing stuff intentionally that sucks. And no one does that. You're 100% right. The product has to be great. That was probably the hardest lesson that I learned from this, is because honestly, when I partnered up with you, I was like, well, this should be pretty easy. I mean, I know some people because of screen printing. I had some decent sized touring artists that I was like, I can get this in front of them right away. And then you know what? The amps will sell themselves. I remember you saying that a couple of times, like right away. And you're like, well, the amp sells itself, man, as soon as you play it. Like, and I was like, yeah. And then the first few shows we did, I'm like, damn it, this stuff does not sell itself. I'm like, it impresses people.
Yeah.
Like people sit down and they love it, but it doesn't sell it.
Yeah.
And there's so much more to that. And that's so much more of a difficult game. So you're 100% right. Like your products have to be great. Otherwise you will not survive.
No,
you will not.
Like, and I mean,
no way.
I know I'm very biased, but I put Dan up in the top 5 of the brilliant amp designers of my lifetime. Like if I wasn't invested in, I mean, I did choose to invest a lot of money and a lot of time into Revv. And it's because when I played the Generator 120, I was so blown away, and I was so convinced that this was, for me, the best amplifier on the planet. It covered every bass that I wanted, because like you said, you kind of made like a flagship, and I had never played a high-gain amp where the clean channels to me were always an afterthought, and I was playing in kind of two worlds at the time. Like I played in like a pop-punk hard rock band, but my brother's a pastor, so I also was playing at church a lot. And like I was always using a Fender at church and then using the Boogie out when I was playing out. Or when I was playing out, we had a few ballads that were clean, I would run an AB switcher, like an ABY switcher, and I would use the Deluxe the Fender DeVille for cleans, and I'd use the rectifier for heavy tones. And the Generator was the first amp that I had played. I'm not saying there's not others that exist. It was just the first one that I had played that I was like, the clean channel is actually really great on this amp. It's not an afterthought. Like most of the time I find, high gain amps, like I've got a lot of high gain stuff that is not Rev. Most of them I would say are one trick ponies. That trick's real fun, but it is a one trick pony. And I found the generator to be the exact opposite of that. Like the green channel on the generator is absolutely my sound. That any amp that I dial in, I try to find that sound. And it wasn't because I had played the generator that I was like, okay, now I'm trying to emulate this. No, this is just the like low to mid gain thing that I gravitate towards in every product I ever touch.
Yeah.
And it was the perfect amount of compression. There's not quite enough saturation in the first one. You changed that in the Mark II.
Yeah.
But it was like right there. If I turned an overdrive pedal on, I was so happy, right? On the green channel. So like to me, I mean, that makes the job way easier, and it makes it way more fun, because if you do have product that is brilliant, and is just top notch, then it is a whole lot easier to sell. I have seen people like try to sell things that honestly they should have taken a bit more time on. It's not garbage. It's just not phenomenal. And I feel like in today's market, you kind of, if you want to go anywhere, the product has to be phenomenal.
Yeah. So Dan, when you were tinkering around with those early designs and all that, what's your background? I kind of know Derek's a little bit musically, but where were you coming out? What kind of music were you playing, and what were those amps that you were messing with early on?
Yeah, it was mostly high gain stuff. I gravitated to hard rock and metal when I was playing out and joining bands. And so it was, a lot of thrash and stuff like that initially. And so I liked a really aggressive but articulate sound. And so really working on it and polishing it was important to me in the beginning. So the generator essentially was just going to be about high gain. Like I was just looking for great metal tone that had very fast response and was super tight. That was kind of the idea. But like Derek sort of touched on too, having a great clean channel for most brands or most people is just an afterthought. And there's a lot of guys that just want a one-trick pony, right? It's just like, I just want a one-channel amp that just sounds just killer. I don't need a clean or anything else. But for me, it was different. I wanted to have everything on board. But the idea was to focus strictly on the high gain channels at first, because it was just what I was into. And so, I didn't really play in anything lighter than, it was pretty thrashy. And
well, Dan, number one, I just want to say this. Dan's not telling everybody that he was the singer in a very hardcore metal band, and he's so soft-spoken. And the first time, I think we had been in partnership for more than 5 years. When I saw a video of him, I'm like, get out. That is not Dan. I'm like, that is Dan. So anyway, he's being very modest about especially when he says that he gravitated towards metal. No, he was like metal AF.
I was entrenched in it. Yeah.
You were telling me you were into, you kind of like the rectifier 5150s. What are the amps that, you were not really a Marshall guy, were you?
I wasn't, no.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't really my thing. I dig the British tone and all that. It's cool. It's got its unique flavor and all that's, for the right application, it's great. But for me, it was more like rectifier 5150 tones. I think one of the bands that I played in last, we were actually combining a crank and a 5150, and so it was blended, right? And just you got a ton of low end from the crank, and it was really aggressive, and then you got the cut from your 5150, and so it just sounded really huge. And so those amps were great, but they still and for my guitar player they were great, and for the dynamics of the band too, it worked great, especially blending. And we only had one guitar player at the time, and I was doing the vocals, and so for me it was just a lot of screaming. And there were times where I thought I'd pick up the guitar and put in that extra layer, but it just never got to it because I was all over the stage when I was screaming, right? It was
because you were a front man.
Yeah.
That's what front men do.
That's right.
And so it was more like, okay, when it came time to build my own app, I wanted something different than that stuff too, right? I wanted something, my taste had changed. And so instead of just having a really thick, girthy low end where it was more loose. I wanted now something that was tight and more articulate. And as I started to design these channels, my tastes would change as I was going about it too, right? Realizing things that I didn't before, perhaps. And so I was like, oh, hey, that's a cool sound. Maybe I'll sort of dive into that a little bit more and see what I can come up with. And so just chasing the generator's sound, it wasn't something that I had a clear goal on initially. It was sort of like, one step would lead to the next. So, oh, hey, I found blending these two stages was pretty cool, and the sound was good. And so then I would move on to something else until it was, it kind of tickled my fancy, where I was like, hey, that's rad, man. Like, I think that's where I want to go with this. So yeah, metal was my background, but, guitar sort of started to fade out of what I was doing as a musician, and picking up the vocals side of things. But didn't mean I really got away from it. Once I started designing again, then guitar really started to become a bigger passion again.
I bet your guitar player just hated you too, because like, can you imagine, like, you've got like guitar players and singers already, in rock bands typically have a little bit of a
friction.
Yeah, a little bit of friction. Imagine if you've got a dude that knows how to design amps and dial in tones better than you're ever going to. That's your singer. That's just like, yeah. So you sure you want to?
Oh yeah.
Sure you want to? You sure you don't want me to fix that for you?
And there were times where I'd be cranking his dials, and he'd be like, "What are you doing? I like you're messing my sound up." I was like, "No, I'm making it better, actually."
Note to self: never play in a band with Dan.
Yeah. Although he did love it when his amp would break, and I was like, "Dad, quick, I need it fixed." So, okay.
I mean, I credit you for this all the time. Like, when I played live, I never knew how to use an effects loop, so. I would never put, like, I would hear like, oh, put your time-based effects in your effects loop, and I'd be like, whatever. I always just ended up running my board in front, like I had my Line 6 DL4 running into the front of the rectifier. And I remember the first few times, like, I could, for the most part, dial in an amp, but it was the first few shows that we were going to. And I remember I went to the Dallas Guitar Show one year, and I had a carbon copy with me, and you're like, oh, hey, give me that. And he plugged it, because I plugged it in front at first. Oh, and you were like, no. I'm like, here, we'll put that in the loop. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know why anybody cares about that. And then he plugged it in the loop and dialed it in. And I was like, this is the way this is supposed to work. Yeah. And it's supposed to sound. And, it was, for the first few, like either NAMM shows or just guitar shows, I would constantly be like, do you want to go in and dial all the amps? Like, as soon as we had him set up, because he's got a bad back, we typically try to make, somebody else do all of the 412 lifting and stuff like that. So, once we've got everything in and cabled up, I'll be like, hey man, I'm like, you want to go dial tones?
Yeah.
And I was always amazed at like how much better I sounded when he dialed me in versus myself. And then I started to pay attention to like, well, what the hell is he doing and what's he listening for? Like, what have I been missing? And part of it was that just, from when I was young and started playing tube amps, it was pretty run and gun, that I was like, I'd get a sound and I'd be like, yeah, that sounds great. That's good. I'm good to go. And as soon as I got a sound that I was like, yeah, that's cool, I wouldn't touch the EQ again.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't like fine tune. And it wasn't until, so I started to kind of watch what he was doing, and also was forced, because I was going to some shows without him, that, when I'm going to stuff, that I'm like, okay, I got to make sure this sounds as good as when Dan's here. Otherwise, it's not going to be good, and everyone's going to make fun of me. So.
Yeah.
So just so that I and the listeners have like a little more context, because I'm just trying to picture this after you described this, Derek, about Dan running around screaming on stage. I'm trying to wrap my mind around this. Like, what kind of metal are we talking about here? Are we talking about like power metal? Are we talking about like Cannibal Corpse? Like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, nothing quite that heavy, but I would say it was more like a thrash. Yeah, like a thrash. Meets,
like a Slayer type of thing.
I would pay so much money for you to scream right now.
Hey,
he's never done it when I'm around. Like, never.
I haven't done it so long. No. It wouldn't do it any
If justice. You go on YouTube, he's going to hate me for this. If you go on YouTube and search for the band Tinnitus at the Zoo in Winnipeg, which was this bar. If you find,
you'll find it.
You find Tinnitus at the Zoo in Winnipeg, you will find Dan Trudeau.
Yeah, screaming it up. So
I'm going to find that.
You should.
Today. As soon as we're done, that is what I'm doing.
Giver.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's so
I
killer.
think it was more like a thrash with screaming, and it's interesting. It's fast. I wouldn't say power, but maybe not too far from that either.
I just find it so hilarious because you're so soft spoken and you are not that on a stage. Like, it'd be almost the equivalent if Manny, our audio engineer, was also a hardcore vocalist, which Manny did play in hardcore bands. So it's quite possible.
So maybe it's him too.
I'm wondering.
He's got the bug.
I'm wondering if there's like some sort of trend there, or maybe some sort of weird character trait that some front people have. Because I just met here not too long. Her name is slipping my mind because I just met her for a brief moment. But there's a band called Gouge Away, and the front lady is here in Portland, and she's very small and very nice and very like, oh, hello, like nice to meet you. And you watch her on stage, and she becomes this monster. Like, it's insane. And she's just like, so nice. Oh, hi, nice to meet you. Hello. And then she just like, oh, wow, she might kill me once she gets on stage. It's very impressive. And they're a great band too. So
that is so true. I find of the vast majority of metal musicians.
Yeah.
Yes.
Are the most polite and like often very like courteous and like soft-spoken people. And then they get on stage. I'm like, so is this it? Is this like, this is your release for this? Is you let all that rage that the rest of us can't hold in, you let it all out on a stage?
It's got to be it.
Yeah.
I actually think there is something to that. I've noticed that trend with metal musicians. I've noticed it with not all, but a lot of fighters and people who are into horror. They're always so chill when you meet them, and then you're like, look at some of their art. You're like, whoa, that is terrifying.
Yeah.
Was that what you're really thinking about? Because I never would have guessed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say there's truth to that. I mean, even looking back at being a metal vocalist, I mean, it took a ton of energy, right? And so you'd kind of just try to find those faucets and just let them rip. And once you've got them out, like, you feel a lot lighter, I think.
Life gets a little bit more manageable when you have that pressure relief valve you can kind of hit once in a while.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is we know that there's problems if you join a metal band again, because we're like, he's got a lot of pent up stress that's coming out in this new project.
Maybe it's due. It's due. Yeah.
I think it is. Let's do it. Yeah, you can have the Rev Amps house band. You be the front. I think this makes sense.
Okay,
let's make it happen.
Perfect.
Nice.
Yeah,
Manny is like,
starting a band.
We are doing this.
Yeah.
Dorian, our videographer and graphic designer, is a punk rock guitar player. He's into it.
Yeah, he's looking over, shaking his head like,
and we've got Sam, our modern metal math rock.
Right. Yeah, we're good to go. We got all the members. We just need a drummer now. Perfect. Yeah.
Sure, I don't know if we have any drummers here anymore.
I don't think so.
We had one for a while. JP was a drummer, but I don't think there's anybody in house. Most of our all of the male workers at Rev are like, all of the dudes are all guitar players, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Either guitar or bass.
Yeah.
Yeah. That tends to happen at gear companies, I found. You work at Pearl, there's a good chance you play drums.
Yep.
It's just kind of the nature of the industry to some degree, which is funny. I'm sure you can speak to this when hiring. What we've found is, and this isn't exclusively true, but sometimes people come in with this perception of they're gonna work at a guitar-based company, and therefore they're gonna play guitar a lot. And it's like, nah, man, I'm sorry, you're gonna be running a machine. That's just what it is.
I legitimately interviewed a kid last week for helping with toll Xing. And he's a guitar player, and I said, like, he's like, it'd just be like, it's kind of a dream job. And I'm like, let me tell you about that dream job right now. I'm like, if you think that you're going to be playing guitar, you're not. I'm like, pretty much ever. I'm like, you're going to be, you're going to be putting a faux vinyl wrap on a wooden box.
Yep.
That's going to be your job. And you're going to do it a lot. So, I'm like, so, while there is this element of like, I mean, it is cool. Like, there's no question. Like, even when, when you're just doing production in a gear company, I mean, there is this I don't know. It's cool to be involved with something that, you know, you have such a huge passion for. And if you are a guitar player, and I mean a real guitar player, not just a hobby guitar player, right? Like there's some people who like have guitars and are just like, you know, it's cool and they can play. And they're, you know, maybe they're more singer-songwriter type people, or maybe they're just like hang out at the campfire, but they don't have like any sort of like gear obsession. Most of the people who end up here have like a gear obsession, and there is nothing cooler than being involved with a company when that's a big part of your life. So, yeah.
And the fact that there's like-minded people too, right? I mean, you can sit and have lunch with somebody that's into the same thing as you and talk about it all day, essentially. So, I mean, there's elements, and you can see sort of behind the scenes, right? Like when we're preparing for NAMM or something's happening, like it builds up this. Essentially, it's part of the dream job, right? Like you're kind of getting to look through the window into something that most people want to be at, and so you kind of get, you know, backstage pass in a way. So even though you're putting Tolex on a wooden head shell all day, you can still see things that you wouldn't normally at other places, right? Because you're connected.
There's 100%. There's something very gratifying too, I found, like especially in production jobs, like because I worked in the screen printing industry before this, and I guess somewhat still do. I mean, I like anytime I'd be out somewhere, if I saw something that like either I had printed or my company had printed, I'd be like, I made that. You know what I mean? And I had, or I still have employees that when they see stuff that they create around town, and I mean, this happens with the guys who build stuff, like Scott Craker will comment on stuff and be like, if you have a D20, there's like a very high likelihood that I built your amp, right? So when he sees people online talking about them, he's like, I built that, you know? So there's this, like, not just level of pride, but there's just something really gratifying about that. Like, hey, I was part of that, and I made that thing that you enjoy or that you use, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I do think that, you know, if you're a musician, that's just amplified exponentially, especially with us being in Winnipeg, right? Like, because it's not known for, you know, like manufacturing, or for definitely not for like music industry manufacturing. So if you have a chance to work in that, I mean, that's
pretty special.
That's things that happen in California and in Tennessee and, you know, like much bigger centers than here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's something really special, no matter who it is, whether it's an artist that you love and you've listened to for years, or if it's just somebody who you don't know that gets to have an experience, and you know that something you were a part of is giving them that feeling that we all are constantly searching for and have experienced from time to time. If you know that you're a part of that chain somehow, you can't help but be excited because you know what that feeling's like. And it's unlike anything else that can be described, especially to people who don't play. It's like the most invigorating, thrilling thing when you get that sound, or you have one of those moments where everything's firing on all cylinders. And if you can be a part of that chain that helped somebody get there, especially if it's somebody you really admire, there's like no better feeling than maybe the feeling itself. Really. It's it's crazy.
Truth.
I would argue on the gear side, I think there is no better feeling than when you get it to an artist that you admire and you see them get that feeling.
Yeah.
Like, you know what that feeling is, but to me, I mean, I had that it wasn't like way early on, but fairly early on. This is a fun story. So just so people get an idea. So we're just outside of Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is just over an hour from the US border. So a lot of products we can't get shipped directly into Canada, or it's just way too expensive to have it shipped here. So we get it shipped to a customs broker. We have a warehouse that we work with in North Dakota that's just across the border. And it used to be that I was back and forth across the border at least once a week, either picking stuff up, or same thing, like we'd have, you know, a lot of our dealers don't want to deal with customs and importing. So we'll often just ship stuff across the border and then have it, like we drop ship it into North Dakota and then it gets forwarded, or I'll drive it across the border and I'll import it and then we ship from North Dakota. So one day, just as I was like getting to customs, I get a phone call. I see it on my phone and it's a San Francisco number, and I'm like, telemarketer. I just hit ignore, and across the border. Like an hour later, I come back across and I see I have a voicemail, and I read the voice to text, and it says, "Hi, Derek. This is Neil Sean from Journey." And I'm like, okay. So I listen to the voicemail. I'm like, that's Neil Sean. So I call him back, and I'm like, this has got to be a joke, right? And he picks up, and I'm like, hi, I'm looking for Neil. And he's like, oh, yeah, hi, Derek. He's like, yeah, I wanted to talk to you about your generator amplifier. He said, I was at Bananas at Large here in San Francisco area, and I got a chance to try it, and I'm really impressed. I'm not currently with an amp company right now. My deal with Black Stars ended, and I'd like to see if you guys have any amps that you could give me. He asked for loaners for the tour that they were doing with Def Leppard. And like the whole time he's talking, I'm thinking is like, I love Journey so much. Like my mom was a huge Journey fan, so I grew up like on, like I know like way too much Journey. Anyway, so
nonsense. There's no such thing.
So I was like, yeah, we could build some amps. He's like, okay, I need 2 heads and I need 2 4x12 cabinets. And if you get them to me by this date, we're being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I'll use them for the ceremony, which will be broadcast on TV. And I was like, this doesn't happen. Like, this is one of my guitar heroes. They don't just phone you and start talking to you. You know what I mean? And I'm like, okay. He's like, all right. He's like, I'll get you the address of where to send them, and we'll get going. And I remember calling you, and I'm like, so Neil Sean called today, and you were like, what? And I'm like, yeah. And like, we got to build amps for Neil. And I mean, we never ended up doing anything more than that. He used them for a few tours, and then that was kind of the end of it.
Hey, that's still awesome.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
You know, but I did. And I mean, I got to meet him a couple of times, and he's a killer guitar player, really interesting dude. And it's moments like that when when you find out that somebody that you have looked up to as a player, especially a guy like that, where it's like they're superstar level, right? Like, your stadium band is asking about a product that you help build and deliver. You know what I mean? Like that to me was a cooler feeling. And, same type of thing. Like I had known Mark Tremonti for a few years because of my printing company. And, when I got asked about like, hey, Mark wants to buy one of your generator amps, like his manager said like, hey, Mark's interested, and can you guys build one? And, we got to meet Mark in person then. Yeah. Like I think I'd met him once before that, and then you start to realize that like, oh, these guys are just normal people, but they also, have this abnormal skill. You know what I mean? Like, or this, unbelievable skill. Yeah. And I think like it's moments like that where you get guys that sit down, and when you see that grin, when they find that thing that you're talking about, right? Like they find that sound in the piece of gear, and it's almost like, we're all chasing after the holy grail of tone, right? And like, we never actually find it, right? Like it's like being a drug addict, that you're just chasing that next high, and you're chasing that next amazing tone. But you get close to it a lot, right? Like in different gear brings you close to it. And when you see that you brought somebody close to that, especially when it's a player that like you've grown up like admiring, that to me is the coolest feeling. Because I feel like it brings like an unbelievable amount of validation to what you've been doing.
Yeah.
Because it's impossible. It's impossible to not have imposter syndrome in what we do. Like
absolutely.
It's impossible to not think like I have successfully fooled everyone into thinking that we're doing something good, because that can't be right.
Totally.
Sometimes guitarists, they don't really even know what they want either, right? And so there's many times where I've done demos for people at NAMM and whatnot at these shows, and they come in and they sort of have an idea of what they want, but then they play through the generator or something. They're like, whoa, what is this? Like, I didn't even realize that was even an option. And so you also, get to enjoy the fact that you're doing this and you're helping people find it. But like Derek said, then you see the look on their face, and it lights up, and you're like, whoa, man, like they just discovered something here too. And so being able to play with all these different sounds, as a guitar player, you maybe, start to understand that there's just so many sounds out there that maybe you haven't even understood or realized. Like even for me, doing this now for the last little while and getting into amplifiers like the new Dynamis sound that we have, like working with Sean Tubbs and realizing what feel really means and how you understand that as a guitar player, right? Because my perception of that in the beginning is not what it is now, thanks to working with guys like Sean. And so just the development of players as we go along, discovering all of this through new gear is pretty exciting. And watching people, when the lights go off for them or go on for them, and all of a sudden they realize something, and you see it in their face, it's fun to be a part of that. And so that's been pretty cool.
It's even exciting just to introduce people to stuff that you don't really have any connection to other than you like it. It's been happening more and more as I get to interview some like literal heroes of mine sometimes. Sometimes they'll be coming through town and be like, hey, can you bring like a box of pedals and we can like nerd out for a little bit? I'm like, well, yes, absolutely. I'll be there waiting at the stadium, And so I'll bring just a big stack of stuff, and seeing the light bulbs go off in their brain, these people who I've loved and respected their art for so many years, and just being able to show them a new thing, and they get excited about it. And I'm like, I don't have any connection to this company. I just think it's cool, and that's why I brought it in the box. It's just these weird experiences that, having Neil Sean call you and getting to do those type of things and getting to interact with people that you really enjoy their output. That's what I call sort of the benefits of this job, right?
Yeah.
Because there are things that you give up by pouring yourself into this industry where you might be, better compensated from a money standpoint if you put the same amount of effort into a different industry. But that's putting it very, very lightly.
Can we touch on that for like 1 second? That like
go for it.
That is such a massive misconception I find with just general just general guitar players, or if you wanted to call them like consumer customers, right? Like where people think that even the biggest companies in this industry, people think that like people are getting super rich from this. Like they're not. Like there are so few companies that that make really good or big money. Like there's less than a handful of them that I know. I'm not complaining about how we get compensated. I feel very, very fortunate and very blessed to be in the position that we get to have good jobs that we love doing, and that we can afford, our houses and things like that. But we're not living in $1 million homes and, living high on the horse. And I don't know.
I usually call it Scrooge McDucking through cash is usually what I say.
Yeah. It's crazy. Like if Dan chose to do something in a completely different field than this with, your background in robotics and stuff like that, you could make 5 times as much money as what you make in the music industry. It is 100%, in my opinion, a labor of love for the vast majority that are in it. And it's just because it's this thing that we're all drawn to. Like we're all so drawn to music. And as guitar players, I'm, always drawn to gear and to tones, right? Like that's my favorite thing, is finding my sound, which is always the same, but I want to find it in every piece of gear and see if it feels different, which one feels squishier and better, right? But yeah, there's so many people that I've met that think that because you own, you're an investor or an owner in Stringjoy, or you're an owner in Revv, or you're an owner in Mythos pedals or whatever, that like all of a sudden, like, oh, you're rich. No, no. And even the big companies, these guys aren't rich. They're, some of them are doing fine, but, nobody's flying private jets that I know of in the music industry. Or in the gear side of the
Besides the
music
artist,
industry.
in the gear industry, right?
Yeah.
And even then, that's the upper echelon, right?
Yeah.
The vast majority of people making their living as a musician, or whatever that means, whether they're gigging, whether they're writing jingles, whatever they're doing, the vast majority of them are just very average people. I don't mean that they're not exceptional talents. I just mean from an income perspective, they're very much just normal people. And I think that was a big reveal to me going into this too, coming from the outside, was not necessarily from a financial standpoint, but just how much we're all the same. Even if we're in completely different bands, completely different genres, once you kind of get into it and you start talking to people like, oh, wow, we really are all the same. In fact, one of my first interviews that my wife was with me for, she was like, these guys are all just like you. I know, weird, right?
Yeah.
Like we're all obsessing over the colors of guitars and whatever else we were talking about at the time.
There's a special kind of stupid it takes to do what we do.
That's right. We got it in spades.
Yeah, exactly.
Somehow fell in this hole.
Yeah.
I don't want to climb out. I hope nobody takes what I'm saying as a complaint. It's not. It's just trying to explain the reality.
That's like if I had it all to do over again, I would do it the same. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like I wouldn't change what I'm doing.
Right.
I mean, there's things that I would do differently, of course, like everybody, because you learn so much by making dumb mistakes that if you don't make them, it would be a lot easier. But I would still choose the same path. And and that's like, for me, it's never been about money. I know that's a cliche thing that a lot of people say, but it's the truth. Like we've always opted to hire more people to do things like bring Sean and them on rather than trying to suck more money out of the company. Like that's never been something that's been a concern of mine, because I'm the type of person that like, and Dan, I mean, I think I can speak for you that we're both very similar this way. Like we're content with the houses that we live in. You know what I mean? Like I'm never chasing after the things that the majority of people are chasing after in life. That's not really what I'm interested in at all. I do chase after a lot of gear. I do that.
I was gonna say, I realize we just said all that, right? And we're both sitting with these backdrops that we have that are not just backdrops.
Yep,
that's where all the money went.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you look at my yard, you would be very disgusted to know that I live my life this way. But in here, it looks cool.
That's all that matters.
Yeah.
Blake, you and I are the same person.
I think
just
so.
Different. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Just you're in Portland and I'm in Winnipeg.
Brothers from another mother, right?
Yep.
There it is.
Yeah. Well, hey, we're getting down to the last few. Oh, sure. You want to say something? Go ahead.
Oh, I'm good. I don't know what I was going to say.
Well, we're getting down to the last few minutes, and I've got some classic questions I like to wrap this up on. But before I do, I like to give the guests a chance to take the floor, say anything you want to say. You're talking to a few thousand people right now. You can shout out your grandma. You can plug your favorite local brewery. You can say anything you want to say. The floor is yours.
I would just like to take this moment to say that if you are ever in Winnipeg, the best burger in Winnipeg is at the James Avenue Pump House, and the burger at Nonsuch is subpar, Manny. Also, if you haven't checked out our stuff, please check it out. RevAmps.com. Oh, and I should tell you, we do a live stream every Wednesday night that is pretty much similar to what we're doing right now, but just with some playing. And we do just like what you talked about, bringing a box of pedals to a stadium. That is what we do. We just bring whatever gear on that we think is cool or that, somehow has made its way into our lives. And we just sit and mess around with it with, between 50 and 100 people hanging out and watching for a couple hours. We grab a couple of beers, mine's more juice than beer, but, grab a couple of beers and sit. And then, Dan comes on every now and then. We do like the Ask Me Anythings. And we do things a little different that way too, where like when we're launching new product, we often will show it on that live stream before it actually comes out, like while it's still in development stages, and be like, hey, what do you guys think?
Yeah.
So you should, follow us on social media, whatever social media you use, and check out the Gear and Beer live streams that we do on Wednesdays.
Yep.
That's my plug.
Cool.
Yeah, I think I'd go with that too. I think, you know what? Sort of how we touched on already, people are pretty similar in this niche, right? And we all kind of like the same things. And so join us on the live stream. And that's kind of what we're doing. And so we hope more people join us there and enjoy what we enjoy.
And the Pub House burger's better is what you're saying.
There you go.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. The last two classic questions. We'll start with this one. What is your favorite Boss pedal?
Okay. Interesting. Well, the Metal Zone, yeah, kind of a classic, right?
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that it's my favorite. To be honest, I don't play a lot of Boss pedals except for things like that. Yeah.
There we go.
And
The
so,
Metal Zone.
I've gotten a lot of tones out of that thing. And so, you know, it's probably the one that I've played around with the most with bands. It was kind of the one that sort of always showed up on stages because of the type of music I played. And so I'd be like, hey, check out my Metal Zone tone. And you get that grindy, almost chainsaw type tone. So I don't know. That's the one that comes to mind. Whether it's my favorite or not, I'm not sure. But I think that's the one that really stands out for me is that the Metal Zone.
All right.
I'm going to have to go with... I have not used Boss pedals in a very long time. But I do think, like, revisiting them when I do use them, I do think they are actually significantly better than what they get credit for. Mm-hmm. So I would say the one that I used the most when I was actually playing that wasn't the TU2 tuner, because that was the tuner for forever, I would go with Boss Tremolo.
TR2.
Yeah.
Yep.
That was
it's a bit of an underdog.
That's probably the one that I used the most. It was either that or the phase shifter, but probably the TU2 or the TR2.
Yeah, and the TU2. But yeah,
yes.
Sure.
Yeah,
I like it. Good answers.
Yeah.
All right. Here we go. Final question. This one, I could see a lot of debate happening, but we'll see what Winnipeg's answer for this is. What is your favorite kind of pizza?
Well, I always gravitate to the back bacon and onion thin crust. Yeah, and we got a lot of local joints here that do it really well. So,
are you talking like style or toppings?
As detailed as you want to get, because I'm pretty nerdy about it.
Ooh, that Chicago deep dish we had not too long ago was pretty good, though.
I'm the opposite of him. I'm not like is good, but I'm not a Chicago deep dish guy. I would go with New York style, but I would say Neapolitan style is the best. Like a good like wood fired pizza.
Oh, that's good too.
I'm pretty much good with any toppings on it. I am unashamedly, I like ham and pineapple pizza.
Yeah, I do too.
We're not quite the same person.
Yeah.
All right.
there it is. That's why we had to be separated. Yeah. I would say typically I would go with like some sort of like, something with like salami and pepperoni and maybe a cracked egg on top in like a Neapolitan style, like a wood-fired, coal-fired.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah. But that's if we're getting fancy pizza, right? Like if we're getting high-class pizza.
Sure.
If we're just getting like, cheap and dirty, I want like either barbecue chicken pizza or ham and pineapple is what I'm going to gravitate towards.
All right.
Yeah.
I like that.
And I would take New York over Chicago style.
And I like all. I can appreciate Chicago. I've always said, and some people get mad at me about this, but I always say that Chicago style like deep dish is not really a pizza. It's a pizza cousin. Kind of like you would never call a calzone a pizza. Right. But it's definitely related to a pizza. Yeah. It's pizza-esque. But if you're wanting
pizza
a calzone...
in a sleeping bag.
It's pizza in a sleeping bag.
Pretty much.
I like that. But if you want that, it's kind of a different thing. And I think if you're craving that deep dish Chicago style, it's kind of a different thing. But all in the same general product category, if you want to call it that. So,
yeah, absolutely.
I like it.
Yeah,
I want to know what's yours. Come on.
So I am I'm with you. I New York City completely changed my brain on how how pizza can be.
Yep.
I had a friend go and rave about it, and he would show me pictures, and I didn't really understand. I was like, it looks like pizza. I don't get what you're saying. And I finally went there and did some exploring and realized that I was wrong, and the hype is real. And so there's some very incredible places, and I'll never get to try them all.
Yeah.
I've been, was it 2 or 3 times, and you just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
But since you guys do have a Nashville connection, I will say one of my favorite pizzas is in Nashville at a place called Smith & Lentz.
Oh,
so next time you're there, they make a very good pie. A very, very good pie. So,
I'm going to be there in 2 weeks, so I'm going to try that.
Yep.
I like 5 Points pizza in Nashville. It's good.
5 Points is solid. Yep.
It's good stuff.
I like it. But yeah, some of my favorite pizza ever is actually something I didn't know existed until the last couple of years, is a tavern style thin crust pizza. It's like a cracker crust, and Chicago is all known for the deep dish. This is like a thin cracker crust cut into squares, and it's so satisfying when it's done right. There's a guy here that started doing them in his kitchen during the pandemic, and it became like a speakeasy operation where you had to like put your name on a list, and he would literally, you'd go to his house, and he would literally give you a pie from his oven at his house. And Jerry's Pizza here in Portland, he's supposedly going to open a real location here pretty soon, so I hope he does.
Nice,
because it's amazing.
That sounds great.
I'm gonna go get pizza for lunch now.
yeah.
There's no good pizza close to us right now.
That's the worst.
Yeah, we're like a solid 25 minutes from a good pizza place.
Yeah.
Man, I'm sorry. That's rough.
Yeah,
that's okay.
It is.
We'll get by.
It's okay. So, I'm fat enough I don't need pizza for lunch.
We'll get by somehow.
Yeah. Single tier.
Well, guys, thank you so much for coming on. Let's see what kind of nonsense we can get into on Patreon. Does that work for you?
Yeah, sounds good.
Sounds great, man.
I'm not taking my clothes off, though, man. Not again.
What?
It was weird last time.
I didn't think it was that weird. I thought it was nice.
I appreciate that. That gives me a little more self-esteem.
I'm just trying to give the people what they want,
Yeah.
All right, everybody. For Derek and Dan, this is Blake. And as always, folks, good luck and good tones.